This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. And Rudy Giulianis says that Trump could put Jim Comey in a wood chipper, I should say, or wood chopper.
Okay, Fargo.
And still not be prosecuted. It's part of the presidential power. He also suggests that Trump can pardon himself. Why would he need to? He didn't answer that, but this is what he said on Sunday with Clinton Foundation donor Zero.
Do you and the president's attorneys believe the president has the power to pardon himself?
He's not, but he probably does. I mean, he has no intention of pardoning himself, but he probably does. It doesn't say he can't. I mean, that's another really interesting constitutional argument. Can the president pardon himself?
You think it's an open question?
I used to run the pardon attorney. It would be an open question. I think it would probably get answered by, gosh, that's what the Constitution says, and if you want to change it, change it. But, yeah.
And then President Trump tweeted less than a half hour ago, as has been stated by numerous legal scholars, I have the absolute right to pardon, all in capital letters, pardon myself, but why would I do that when I've done nothing wrong? In the meantime, the never-ending witch hunt led by 13 very angry and conflicted Democrats and others continues into the midterms, exclamation point.
Well, I don't understand why Rudy Giuliani didn't make that point. I mean, arguably he could. You'd have to see which way the Supreme Court would fall on that, more than likely. But why would he need to? Because there's nothing that he's done that would necessitate a pardon. I don't know why he didn't make that case. Now, the more relevant topic, at least with what we know publicly, is the question of the subpoena. And if the president was subpoenaed by Mueller, would they comply or would they fight it?
In addition to the constitutional issue, which will be, a complex one, we admit that, although we think we have the better argument. The one that's definitive is the OLC, Office of Legal Counsel in the Justice Department, wrote a memo at the conclusion of the Clinton thing, the Clinton administration, and said, you cannot indict a sitting president, nor can you compel process. So it's part of the rules of the Justice Department. And Mueller is
Has
nothing.
Has he responded to the letter?
Has not.
No response to the letter.
And Mueller is completely surrounded by the rules of the Justice Department and agreed to follow them.
So Giuliani is saying he can't do that, and if he tries to do it, essentially, we're going to fight it. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Michael Goodwin, New York Post columnist and Fox News contributor. His most recent piece in the Post is James Comey isn't above the law. Michael, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, guys. Thank you.
I'll let you make your case about Jim Comey not being above the law, although I certainly agree. But what about Rudy's metaphor? He could shoot Jim Comey and he wouldn't be prosecuted. Even if I know he's trying to be colorful and illustrate the legal argument, but doesn't it just come across as saying that indicating the president is above the law? Isn't that troubling at all, some of the rhetoric coming from Trump's legal team?
Well, look, I think there are two ways to look at it. One is kind of in a room of legal scholars debating the fine points of the Constitution and the Justice Department regulations, and the other is on Sunday morning television. And I think what Rudy said there, as you correctly note, it doesn't translate to people watching that. I mean, they don't get the finer points. This is a kind of exploratory mindset that Rudy has taken in a number of these interviews, and I think he's thrown a lot of things in the air that are extremely provocative in ways that only muddy the waters as to what the real legal issues are, and frankly, whether Trump bears any guilt, whether he's done anything that would lead to an indictment, would lead to a subpoena. So I think Rudy would be advised to. He doesn't have to answer every question in a kind of totally hypothetical, ultimate, extreme way. He can simply, I think, lay out the contours of the Constitution and the Justice Department regulation. I mean, he's a good lawyer. He was a very good lawyer. I think he's showing a lot of rust in some of these interviews.
Do you think, even before he hit the Sunday talk shows and gave that, bizarre hypothetical to the Huffington Post, on Saturday, he's cranking up the tension with Robert Mueller, saying that he's going to fight the subpoena. Is that, what are your thoughts on all of it? I mean, should President Trump even sit down? Because I think it's a perjury trap.
Right. Look, I think that's the ultimate conclusion they've reached, is that that an interview with the president would not serve the president. And I thought, so I think that's what the subpoena, again, the legal argument. To our knowledge, there has been no subpoena. So this is, again, a theoretical conversation. It's an important one, but I think it's getting lost as to where we really are in this process. I thought the revelation over the weekend of the letter that Trump's team wrote to Mueller in January, now some time ago, but I thought the points it raised were interesting, that essentially what evidence do you have to show us that you need an interview with the president? In other words, it should be the last resort. It should be when you cannot get the information otherwise. And we have given you over 1 million documents. And you've interviewed lots and lots of people, including the White House, how can it be that you don't have everything you need? And if not, what is it that you need? And so I think it's a way of trying to get to what does Mueller have, what is he looking at exactly? And then so Mueller apparently responds with those list of questions that were leaked, some 50 questions that in a way were not very detailed. Many of them struck me as just fishing, as though he had nothing. But so I think that's the reason that the president's team sees. You go in there, you sit down. They don't really have anything, but they just keep throwing things at you. And at some point, you're going to contradict yourself. You're going to contradict what they know or what you've said elsewhere. Perjury. So I think that is their thinking, that unless Mueller can really narrow down what he wants to ask the president. And again, this is not just about Trump. I think we have to remember, too, that's what Giuliani and even the president in the tweet you referenced. He's talking about executive privilege. He's talking about the power of the Oval Office that transcends him or any individual successor. And I think that's where the best arguments lie. And I think Rudy, unfortunately, is clouding the water with all of this extreme, hypothetical.
Well, and a good example of the president potentially tripping himself up is included in that 20-page memo that was leaked that you're describing with respect to his involvement in writing the statement in response to the revelation about the Trump Tower meeting with the Russian lawyer Veselnitskaya and in him allegedly dictating a statement to Don Jr. in response to the public inquiry, which is not consistent with what he said subsequently. But the other thing that's interesting about the memo is, they go right to the suggestion that the firing of Comey, this is one of the big touchstones. That's a possible indicator of obstruction. And they essentially lay out the case. Look, even if you don't believe that the president can't be charged or pursued for obstruction of justice with terminating somebody for whatever reason that's under his authority, look at what Jim Comey said. Jim Comey essentially said after the Let It Go meeting over General Flynn that the relationship was fine. He never pursued the Let It Go. He never thought he was being interfered with. He subsequently said in correspondence that the relationship is fine. I think I'm going to be here for another 6.5 years and all this stuff. So, kind of what evidence is there that where you're trying to go is going to has any basis, has the possibility to bear any fruit?
Look, I think that's well said. That there is that's the effort to get Mueller to focus more directly on what it is he's looking at, because many have made this point, as you just did, Alan Dershowitz included, that the president can fire anybody. I mean, that's the executive power. Anybody who works for him. To say otherwise, even to protect a general counsel, a special counsel, would be to curb the executive power, and that's not constitutional. So I think there are a lot of arguments on that. But look, I think we also, even here, need to recall some of some of the background of Mueller's investigation itself, that Trump feels the whole thing is part of a campaign to delegitimize his election. And so I think the president and his team are not just trying to protect him, his own career, but also this notion that everything about Mueller, that the Russian dossier, the FISA warrants, all of the cloud about how that was obtained, that Clinton paid for it, that Sidney Blumenthal was involved in some of this, that what was Clapper doing, what was Brennan doing, what was Comey doing during the election. All of that, I think, for Trump is still a huge hurdle because someone said to me the other day, why didn't you just come out and say what Russia did was horrible? Well, because I think that is exactly what Hillary Clinton wants to argue continually. And many Democrats on the left still argue that Trump was illegitimately elected. And there's absolutely no evidence of that. But from Trump's point of view, Mueller's entire investigation is based on that false claim. And so I think that's why the president sometimes gets tripped up it looks like he's shadowboxing, because he is. There is a shadow that has been created over his election, over his administration, that Mueller will not let go. As long as Mueller is doing his investigation, that shadow remains. And I think that is the larger context here.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, it was just last week, Jim Clapper on his own book tour suggests that the Russians threw the election to Trump without any evidence. Even nobody from the Obama administration, other than him, has even gone so far as to say that. It's just so reckless.
And he has said exactly the opposite in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. He is Michael Goodwin. His most recent piece, the New York Post, James Comey isn't above the law. You want to check that out. New York Post columnist, Fox News contributor Michael, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.